Hi everyone, welcome to another video in our DBT series. This video is about DBT environments. In this particular video, I am going to be covering the practical implementation of the DBT environment, especially in DBT core. If you want to understand the theoretical concepts, then I have covered them in my previous video, and I would highly encourage you to watch that video first and then come to this video for understanding the practical implementation. In the previous video, I covered what is a DBT environment, why do we need them, how many DBT environments should be there in a production grade project. If you're new here, then I am Radhika. Welcome to my YouTube channel DataZard. And now without further ado, let's jump right into this one. Before starting the video, I want to talk about again the target variable which we have discussed in the previous video. So if we go back to our DBT project, here you can see that in profiles.yml file, we have this target. Now if we just run dbt run, then right now our default target is dev. However, if we do dbt run -- target, like add this target flag and then do prod, which means that we are saying to dbt that now the target is not dev, replace this with prod, not over here but in the background when you are running things, which means that this target will now be prod. Now why am I revising this concept? Because this target is actually a very useful thing when you are setting up an environment in DBT. Whenever you have to run a model, whenever you create a seed, a snapshot, anything which is going into your data warehouse, what do you actually need? You always need to know in which database this should go to in the data warehouse. You always need to know the schema where these will be created, and then the table name. Table name is just your file name, so this is sorted. What about this database and schema name? How do DBT gets to know that which database it should choose and which schema it should choose? So DBT runs two macros behind the scene. To get the database name, the macro is generate database name, and to get the schema, it uses a macro which is called as generate schema name. These are the two macros that DBT uses to get this information, and in both of these, DBT uses this target variable. And we have seen from above that if we do target.database, then we get the database name that we have set up in the profiles.yml. Over here, for dev, we have this database. For prod, we have this database. And similarly, if we do target.schema, then we get the schema name which is fed for this schema. Now let me show you these two macros in DBT. So I'm going into DBT's official documentation, and here you can see generate database name macro. And if you see closely over here, you will see target.database. So it's setting this default database as target.database, and if nothing is given, then this is what will be chosen. Otherwise, whatever your custom schema name is, that is going to be chosen, where you're going to pass it from here. Similarly, going into the schema one, so this is macro generate schema name, and here you can see we are seeing target.schema, which is going to fetch the schema. So if you want to use default schema, then you use target.schema, which means whatever the schema is which is defined in your profiles.yml file, otherwise you pass the custom schema name. Now because both of these macros, they are using these target variables, target.database, target.schema, That is why, because they are using these out of the box, that is why whenever you're doing these environment separation, it's just going to work out of the box as soon as you set up this in your profiles.yml file. And if you remember from our previous config, that we have actually used both of these and we have replaced these with our custom logic. So if I go into the macros, we can name these anything. So for schema, you can see that our file name is different, schema name, but the macro that we are using is generate schema name, and we are using this as is. We have just removed some of the logic, but we are still using target.schema. Now because we have given this generate schema name macro in our DBT project itself, so this will take precedence over DBT's built-in generate schema name. That is not going to be used. This is going to be used. Why am I calling this out? Because we have got this generate database name as well. Like we are using a macro for generating the database name. So if you see here in bronze HR data, we are using database, get database using a var like a variable, not target, which is why we are using this particular get database macro. So that is why DBT is using this to get the database names. However, I'm going to be removing these and replacing them with the target logic. The reason why I use this vars for getting the database name was, in the macros video, I wanted to show you a database specific config and I wanted to show you that use case using variables. That is why I explained setting up database using that. However, the industry best practice is to use target.name. So that is exactly what we are going to do over here. Now let us take a moment to understand why var is not an industry practice when it comes to this type of config which we are doing with target. So when it comes to these variables, this var, you can find this in the dbt_project.yml file, and here we have said that we have vars, we just have one variable which is env. This is a variable name, you can put in anything, and we have said that for our use case env is dev for now. If we have to override this value, then what we can do is we can just run dbt run. We can use this vars flag and then say that this env should be equal to prod, and then the next time it runs, like this time it runs, our env will be prod and the prod database name would be chosen, because that is how we are using this variable in the macro. So let me show you the get database name macro. All we are saying is when it is prod, then use this database, otherwise use this particular database, and default database is HR Analytics. If you see here closely, with this var, the only thing that we are doing is we are able to change the database name. What if this prod database lives in an altogether different Snowflake account? Which means that the user, password, role, database, warehouse, schema, all of these things, even the account, these would be different. What if the prod database is not in Snowflake but in some other system, maybe Redshift? Then the type would be Redshift and all of these details would be different. And we are not able to control this using the vars keyword, because all we are doing over here is doing things like this. That is why the industry best practice is to use this target variable. When we use this target, then we can define that there are two altogether different environments if there are, and even if there are not, then we can define these things to keep DBT runs separate from dev environment to prod environment, so that we don't accidentally mix up anything, which could be possible if we are doing vars. So then a question that could be coming to your mind is, why should we bother using vars then if we can do things using target? So target should be used for infrastructure stuff like database name, role, username, warehouse, compute, etc. For all of this stuff, target is a good choice. But if you have to do any business parameter, or if you have any project level parameters, In this case, vars is a really good choice. For example, if you are running something and you have to run this in the dev window, then you can define a look back window as to how many days do we need to look back for running this in the dev environment. When we are running in dev environment, we don't need to run things from the very beginning. We can just do like last 7 days, last 30 days. So we can have a variable like look back in the vars, which we can set up so that every time we just use a dev config, then this is chosen as 30 days. And in prod, we can just redefine this. So when we run this in prod, we can say that the look back is we do from the beginning of the data. So for such things, we use the var keyword, and if it is infrastructure related, then use the target keyword. So just to give you an overview again, in our dbt_project.yml file, we have this vars. We have defined env as dev, and then we have defined this particular macro where we are using this environment, where we are using this env variable to say if it is prod, connect to prod HR analytics. When it is env, then the database that should be used is dev HR analytics, otherwise HR analytics. And then if we go into one of these models, let's say bronze HR data, then we are saying get the database name using this macro. So if we are running in dev, then the dev database is chosen, and if we are running in prod, then the prod database is chosen. So this is how the functioning is happening right now with the help of macros and the config that we have defined. But now we have understood that this is not the best practice and we have to use target so that these things, they are real, they are automatic environment signals, and var can be just a separate static thing which can live in our dbt_project.yml file. So now let us see how we can do these things. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this vars logic. I'm removing this altogether because there is no other place that we are using this variables concept. But if you are using the variables concept somewhere else, then you can just remove this vars from this particular env variable from here. So I'm just going to remove this for now and save it. Now, from the earlier explanation, you already know that when DBT is trying to create a seed, a model, a snapshot, then it automatically calls this generate database name macro, which is a built-in macro to understand which database should be used to create this particular DBT concept, seed, snapshot, or model. In our case, we were writing our own custom logic for this, but now because we want to use this target.database concept, so what you can do is you can just copy this over here and get this in here. So we know that if we are writing the same DBT's built-in macro in our project, then this version will take precedence over DBT's built-in version. And if we want to add any custom logic over here, then we can do it. But for us, I want to keep this the same as DBT's original macro. I don't want to have any other thing over here. So either we can replace this particular get database with this macro which we have copied from DBT documentation, so that when DBT is trying to get the database name, it uses this particular macro, and the rest of the things which we have over here like bronze HR data, these will have to change. But because I'm not adding any additional logic to this particular macro, so why bother getting this macro over here for now? So that is why I'm just going to delete this one altogether. I don't want to use this macro. And now I'm going to make the changes in all of my models because I was using this particular macro over there. So I'm going to delete this config. We can just keep the materialization config over here. Similarly, from every place, I'm going to delete this logic. We don't want this logic over here. Let's save it. Then in gold attrition, here also we are defining config just for the database. So I can just remove this altogether. Then here it is fine. Here also we have config for database, so we don't need this. So you can see that we are trying to optimize the way we are doing things, And with the help of dbt's built-in macro, we are able to remove these things which is custom logic. So let's remove this altogether. And now when dbt is going to materialize this particular model, then it is going to go into dbt's actual generate database name macro, which it already has information of, and use this target.database logic. And as per our profiles.yml file, it will choose whichever environment that we are running it in. If dev environment, then this one. If prod environment, then this one. There is another change that we have to make. We are using this environment variable logic in the dbt HR analytics seeds. So I'm just going to remove this logic, and for seeds I'm going to say the schema is seeds. Let's just save this. Now I'm going to open up the terminal. Let's activate our environment. This. Then let us go to our dbt folder. And now here, now we also have to remove this get database from properties.yml in the macros folder, because we have provided documentation of the get database macro that we were using earlier, and we are not using it. If we don't remove this, then dbt is going to throw an error. So I'm going to remove this, save it. We have got some usage in this model as well. We are using that get database macro, so it's going to throw an error here as well. So I am saving this now. And now let me first show you the Snowflake. So here I'm refreshing the Snowflake, and you see in the prod HR analytics, we only have two schemas, which is information schema and public. These are all the built-in databases, built-in schemas provided by Snowflake. So now let us run this. dbt run -- target. This time I'm going to use prod because I want to sync the model that I'm building into prod. For selecting just one model, I'm doing -s, and the model that I'm creating is bronze HR data. Okay, I've misspelled target over here. There are some warnings, but that is fine. I had some configuration issue in the profiles.yml file. I had an incorrect name for the prod database. Here I have prod HR analytics, but if you see from this particular error, it says the database that we tried to connect to is HR analytics prod, a name mismatch, because of which dbt didn't allow to do it. Now I've updated the config in my profiles.yml. Let us just rerun this. So now dbt is going to connect to our prod database, whatever credentials we have given in the profiles.yml for prod, and it is going to create this model in prod. So now if I come back over here, we can see that it has completed successfully. If we come over here, refresh it, you can see that in prod HR analytics, we have bronze schema, which was not present before, and then we have this bronze HR data. So we can just query this table now. So select star from prod HR analytics, bronze, and bronze HR data. So we can just query it. And now you can see that our model got created in the prod HR analytics database. Earlier when we were using dev, it was syncing into dev. So this is how easy it is when we use the target variable to switch between dev environment and prod environment. If we don't run this flag like this, then it is going to sync into our dev database because the target is set to dev by default. But if we add the flag, then it is going to sync into the prod database because we are replacing dev with prod. In a similar way, you can do the full dbt run with prod, and the way to do it would be dbt run -- target prod, and because we do not select anything, it's going to do the full thing, build models, build snapshots, build seeds in the prod database now. So feel free to do this by yourself. I hope I was able to explain you that why Target is the best thing to use when it comes to infrastructure related configuration, and why we cannot use vars for this stuff. We should not say we cannot use, because we can use, but it is not the best practice, because we are just duplicating the work which can easily be done by the target variable. So if we are having stuff related to business parameters or project level parameters, then var is the thing to use. But if you have something which is related to infrastructure, then we should be using target, because dbt also itself uses target in the inbuilt macros that it uses. I hope I was able to explain you these things. If you have any questions related to any of these configs, whether var or target or why we used what, please let me know in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, then please do subscribe, as I don't want you to miss out on any future videos. Thank you for watching. I will see you in my next one.